So question 4, manufacturing. The information below relates to Drakensberg Water Limited. Drakensberg Water Limited manufactures bottles of water. The water comes from a natural spring. Their financial year ends on the 31st of March. Right, again guys, I'm not looking at all the information, but I'm scanning through my information. So information 1, immediately I notice it is my balances of stock. So stock of raw materials, again, 2018, this time around is the beginning of the year. 2019 is the end of the financial year. So please remember guys, that is the way you're working, okay? So beginning of the year, okay, and then I've got end of the year. So I've got stock of raw materials, work in progress stock, finished goods, and I've got again indirect material. Then additional information and transactions for the year, right? So the first bit of information dealing with raw materials, as you can see, I'm not reading through. The second bit of information, again, I see the word raw materials. Third bit of information, once again, raw materials. Information 4, again, guys, they're talking about raw materials. And then finally, information 5 is slightly different because they're now talking about salary and wages. Okay, so in this particular question, oh, there's more information. Oops, let's look at the rest. So 2.6, certain costs are allocated according to floor area. These are my rent, insurance, water and electricity, depreciation, and indirect material cost. Okay, so immediately this relates to factory overheads, right? And clearly I can see the rest of the information, right? They're talking about rent, they're talking about insurance, water and electricity, depreciation, indirect materials. All of this deals with factory overheads. Okay, right. And then finally, the last bits of information given to me is during the year the business produced, so the number of bottles of water produced, number that was sold is given to me. Then they're also giving me each bottle of water is marked with a selling price of 9 Rand 50. And then the cost accountant calculated total fixed costs for the year to be, so there's that total fixed cost, and then variable cost per unit is also given to me. So as you can see, the information slightly different. Okay, right, so let's get started with the question. Once again, they want me to calculate the production cost statement, but I am going to start off with the note first, and then I'm going to do the production cost statement. Right, so the note for direct material cost. Now again, guys, in the previous question, we did a calculation, but here you need to know your actual format because they are clearly telling you that you need to complete the note for direct material cost. Okay, so please remember, guys, learn your format. Right, so we're going to start off with opening stock. And at the beginning of the year, if we go back to our information, direct materials had an opening stock. Remember, I've got to take the right figure. So stock of raw materials, beginning of the year, 13,200. So let's fill that in. 13,200 is my opening stock. Right, then they're asking me to show net purchases. Now remember, guys, when they talk about net purchases, they are referring to total purchases minus any returns, minus any theft or damage of raw materials. That's what we mean by net purchases. So let's start with total purchases for the year. Okay, so looking at the information given, right, raw materials, and I'm now looking at 2.1, raw materials amounting to 120,000 were bought on credit. This amount represents 40% of total purchases of raw materials, and clearly they are not giving me total purchases. So in order for me to calculate total purchases, not difficult, I'm going to use credit purchases, which is 120,000. Remember, total purchase means I want 100%. So I'm going to multiply that by 100 because I want total, divided by I have or I've been given 40%. So divide that by 40. That would now give me total purchases. Okay, so let's do that quickly. So 120,000 times 100 divided by 40, and that is giving me an amount of 300,000. Okay, so there's my total purchases. So let's just take that through. So total purchases, right, there we go. So total purchases, an amount of 300,000. Right, now let's look at, were there any returns? So if I go back to my information, right, information 2 deals with imports, so there's obviously no returns. Information 3 deals with carriage, and they are my returns. So 4,500 of raw materials were damaged. 16,200 was returned to creditors. So net purchases, I'm going to subtract the 4,500 that was damaged, and I'm also going to subtract the raw materials that were returned. So let's do that to get our net purchases. Okay, so minus the stock that was damaged, an amount of 4,500. And remember, I'm also subtracting the amount that was returned, 16,200. And that is now going to give me net purchases, an amount of, so 300,000 minus 4,500 minus 16,200. Okay, and I'm getting a total of 279,300. So 279,300. Okay. Right, then if I move on, remember I now need to include carriage on purchases, and I need to show this separately, as well as any import duties. Okay, I also should show this separately because it's the note. So carriage on purchases, let's look at again the information given. Right, so my carriage on raw materials amounts to 42,000. Okay, so all I have to do is fill in the 42,000. Okay, and then we've got import duties. So let's go back to the information given. So they're telling me information 2.2, 10% of raw materials were imported and 5% of the purchase price was paid as custom duties, or obviously as your tax, your import duties. Right, so remember guys, we already calculated our total purchases as 300,000. 10% was imported. So if I multiply that by 10%, I should get 30,000. And on that 30,000, we had to pay 5% as import duties or custom duties. So times 5%. Okay, so let's do that on the calculator quickly. Right, it should be 30,000 times 5%, and that should be 1,500. So that was our import duties. So let's now include that figure, import duties, an amount of 1,500. Okay, right, and then finally, on the last line, closing stock. And remember, your closing stock must be in brackets. So my closing stock, or stock that was not used at the end of the financial year, an amount of 12,000. And obviously, guys, that 12,000 is now going to be shown as closing stock. So 12,000 in closing stock. Okay, right, then finally on the last line, my direct material cost. And remember, this is what was used in the production process. So my direct material cost, if I get my calculator out, So I'm starting off with 13,200. Okay, I'm then adding my net purchases of 279,300. And then, guys, I am subtracting 42,000. No, sorry, I'm not subtracting. Let's just fix that. I'm adding the 42,000. So plus 42,000. Okay, then I'm obviously adding 1,500, the tax that was paid, minus 12,000. And my expense for the year, an amount of 324,000. And remember, guys, that 324,000 direct material cost, an amount of 324,000. Okay, so that note worth at least 8 marks. Right, I'm hoping you guys are still following, you're still paying attention, because remember, even though some of this is a repeat, it is absolutely important, guys. It's a lovely section. I keep on saying that because it truly is a good section in the exam. And again, you want to score maximum for this particular section. Okay. Okay, then the next bit of information given is my note for manufacturing overheads. I know I'm busy doing the production cost statement, but let's now look at my manufacturing overheads for 11 marks, because that is obviously going to go into my production cost statement. So manufacturing overheads is just another word for factory overheads. So let's use the term that you are comfortable with. Okay, so factory overheads. Right, so looking at our factory overheads, again, guys, I'm going to start off with indirect material first. So my indirect material, and looking at the information given, I've got to obviously use balance at the beginning of the year first. So at the beginning of the year, my indirect material was 11,200. So let's fill that in. So at the beginning of the year, indirect materials, 11,200. To this figure, remember, I'm going to once again add purchases of indirect material. So back to our information. And remember, this time we are looking at indirect material, which I think is on the next page. Yes, it is. So my indirect materials purchased 42,500. And remember, that needs to be added. So indirect materials purchased plus 42,500. Closing balance of indirect materials must be subtracted. So my closing balance, indirect materials not used at the end of the year. Okay, end of the year, guys, be careful. End of the year, 13,450. So again, let's fill that in. 13,450. Right, now before I close brackets, or before I take out my calculator rather, there was a bit more information that was given. So if we go back to 2.6, I want you guys to please follow. Right, so the additional information given, guys, I'm just trying to find a different color pen. Certain costs are allocated according to floor space or floor area. These are rent, insurance, water and electricity, depreciation, and indirect material cost. So clearly, not all the indirect material is used in the factory. Some of the indirect material is used in the office, some is used in the sales department. Okay, and once again, remember, we are focusing on what was used only in the factory. So looking at the floor space, the factory, 160 square meters, office, 200 square meters, sales department, 20 square meters. So in total, right, the business premises is obviously 200 square meters. So if I now work out the percentage in terms of my factory, all I'm doing is taking 160 divided by 200 times 100, and that will give me a percentage of, so 160 divided by 200, right, let's times that by 100, and the factory floor space is 80%. So remember, only 80% of indirect materials was used in the factory. Okay, so this entire amount times 80%. Right, so let's get our calculator out. Okay, let's move that. So we've got 11,200 plus 42,500 plus, no, sorry, it should be minus closing stock, 13,450. Okay, but only 80% is used in the factory, so times 80%, and the amount used in the factory, 32,200. So 32,200. Okay, right, indirect material done. Let's now move on to our other costs. Okay, so looking at the next bit of information, okay, I'm going to look at salary and wages. So salary and wages bill for the year was 545,000. This amount includes employers' contribution. Okay, 105,000 was allocated to the factory manager. So clearly this 105,000 is indirect labor. Okay, remember guys, the factory manager doesn't make the product. The factory manager will supervise. Okay, so hence indirect labor. 145,000 was for office and sales staff, and the balance was the wages for the production staff. So remember, production staff is obviously your direct labor. Right, so let's calculate direct labor, and we can obviously fill that into our production cost statement at the same time since we're looking at the calculation. So 545,000 is the total salary and wages for the year. I'm going to now subtract the wages that was paid, or the salary that was paid to the manager, 105,000, minus the salary paid to the office and sales staff, so minus 145,000, and the factory workers, their wage, an amount of 295,000. The 295,000. So remember guys, indirect labor will be the 105,000, your direct labor 295,000. So let's fill in these figures. Okay, so I'm going to start off with, right, let's start off with indirect labor. And here it's only the factory manager, and your indirect labor is an amount of, indirect labor, an amount of 105,000. Right, and then my direct labor, if I go up, so my direct labor should be an amount of, the amount that we calculated earlier on, 295,000. Okay, right, the next part of the calculation. So let's go back to our info. Okay, so we've now sorted out, okay, we've sorted all of this. Right, so we can now move on to the other expenses relating to factory overheads. Okay, so 2.6.1, the pre-adjustment trial balance includes rent expense of 214,500. Rent was increased on the 1st of December 2018 with 8%. It was discovered that rent was paid 1 month in advance. So immediately you've got a year-end adjustment. Now remember guys, when it comes to this particular calculation, I know we have various ways to do the calculation. Please use the method that you prefer. There's one method I prefer, but some of you may not like that particular method. You may want to solve for X. What is the monthly rent by solving for X? Absolutely fine. Okay, so how am I going to go about doing this calculation? I'm going to start once again with my financial year. So remember, this particular financial year obviously started on the 1st of April, right, and ended on the 31st of March. I just want to quickly confirm that and make sure that is the case, right? So the financial year ends on the 31st of March, so that's correct, 2019. So I just want to fill that in, 31st of March 2019, which means it started on the 1st of April 2018. Now, from the information given to me, rent increased on the 1st of December. Okay, so somewhere here. On the 1st of December, rent increased by 8%, and rent was paid 1 month in advance. In other words, we've already paid the rent for the month of April. Now, I know you guys can't see that, but this should be, we've already paid the rent for April. Okay, so on my timeline, 1st of April until the 1st of December. So if we look at 1st of April until the 1st of December, that should be 8 months. So for 8 months, watch what I'm doing now, guys. For 8 months, my rent was 100%. But then for the next 5 months, remember 1st of December until the end of April. So for the next 5 months, my rent is now 108%. Okay, you guys with me? So I'm going to basically try and work out what is rent in terms of a percentage. 1% is equal to how many rands? That's what I'm basically doing. Okay, so 8%, so 8 times 100 is obviously 800%, plus 5 times 108 should give you 540%. And this is equivalent to the total rent that was paid, an amount of 214,400. So I'm just going to try and write it down here, 214,400. Right, now as you can see, I put that into an equation, right? So I'm basically trying to solve for 1%. So 800% plus 540% will give me 1,340% is equivalent to 214,400 rands. Right, I want to know what is 1%, so I'm going to divide by 1340. I'm going to do the same on the right-hand side, divide by 1340. Obviously, that cancels out. 1% is equal to, so let's get our calculator out, because I clearly cannot work that in my head right now. Right, so 214,400 divided by 1340, and that gives me a figure of 160. And remember, I'm trying to work out the rent for the month of April, right? And that was when our rent increased by 100 or by 8%. So 160 times 108 will give me my monthly rent that now needs to be adjusted. So 160 times 108, and that gives me a figure of 17,280. Okay, right, so once I've done the year-end adjustment, how does this now come into play? So remember, the total rent paid, 214,400. I first need to subtract the year-end adjustment, 17,280, because this belongs to the next financial year. And then I'm only interested in the portion that belongs to the factory. So remember, we worked that out earlier, and the factory portion is 80%. So I'm going to then multiply that by 80%. Okay, and that is going to give me, let's do that. So let's just clear that, 214,400 minus 17,280, right? And that gives me an amount of 197,120 times 80%, and the portion of rent for the factory, an amount of 157. Okay, I'm just going to get that out again. 15769, sorry guys, 69, and there's another 6. Okay, so quite a lot of calculation for one amount, but remember, you're getting those marks in the event of you making a mistake, you're getting those part marks. So my rent expense, not a nice color, so let's change that. Rent expense, guys, for the factory, and remember, I want to show my calculation, so I'm telling the examiner that I have shown calculations, right? And that amount, not sticking in my brain for some reason, 157,696. So 157,696. Okay, right, now we don't have much time left, and the rest of the calculations, guys, are quite straightforward. When I say straightforward, we've actually done this before. So what I want to do now is, I know I haven't finished the production cost statement, but basically all I'm going to be doing now is adding and looking at other adjustments that you have done before. I've done the rent adjustment. That was quite a difficult adjustment. Often students battle with that adjustment, so that was something slightly different. So what I want to do now, because we don't have much time left, is I want to look at a very important calculation called break even. Now remember guys, often when you practice from past papers, you will find that you will be tested on break even. So what do we mean by break even? This is the point of production where the business doesn't make a profit, nor do they make a loss. In other words, you break even. Your income is equal to your expenses. Now, every manufacturing business needs to calculate their point of break even, because from that point onwards, the business starts making a profit. Okay, so in this case, 4 marks, right? But sometimes it can be more than 4 marks. Sometimes it can go up to 10 marks. So how do you calculate break even? Very, very straightforward, guys. So break even is equal to, right? We're going to take our fixed cost and we're going to divide this by something called contribution. So contribution is basically selling price per unit minus your variable cost per unit. Okay, right, so let's do this calculation and then we'll go back to the previous question, because I just felt that I needed to do this before I actually repeated myself with the other adjustments. Okay, so my fixed cost, if I go to my information, right, and I'm now looking at the information that is given to me at the bottom. Okay, so I'm looking at this information here, guys. The cost accountant has calculated total fixed cost for the year to be an amount of 620,340. Now this amount is obviously given, but in the event of this amount not given, what makes up fixed cost? So remember guys, fixed cost is the sum of your factory overheads. Okay, so you're going to take your factory overheads, and to that factory overheads, you will then add your admin cost. But in this case, the calculation is done for us. But in the event of it not being completed, please make sure that is how you calculate your fixed cost. So let's take that fixed cost through. So 620,340. Okay, so 620. I'm just going to extend the page there. So I've got 620,340. Right, so that is obviously my fixed cost. Now I'm going to look at selling price per unit and variable cost per unit. So let's go back to our information. Right, and our selling price, so each bottle water, the selling price is 9 Rand 50, and the variable cost is 3 Rand 68. So all I'm doing is taking selling price minus my variable cost, and remember it must be per unit. Okay, so the selling price, let's do that quickly. The selling price, okay, extend the page again. The selling price was given to me at 9 Rand 50 minus the variable cost, an amount of 3 Rand 68. Okay, right, so let's take our calculator out. I just want to do one more step before I look at the final answer. So 620,340 divided by, okay, you guys need to forgive me because getting a bit tired now, right? But hopefully you guys are still with me. 950 minus 3 Rand 68, and that gives us, right, contribution of 5 Rand 82. Remember guys, I'm using the word contribution because selling price minus variable cost per unit is what we call contribution. Okay, right, and now I'm ready to calculate the point of break even. Okay, so 620, 340 divided by 5 Rand 82, and the units that need to be sold, right? So the point of break even, an amount of 106. Just get that out again. So 106,587, or you can round up. So 588. Right. So this is how many units must be manufactured and sold in order for the business to break even. Okay. Guys, don't let the word manufacturing confuse you. Obviously, we are talking about factory overhead cost. Okay, so let's quickly look at the last few adjustments in terms of insurance, water and electricity, and depreciation. So insurance for the factory for the year amounts to 44,000. So I don't need to calculate anything there. So easy marks, I'm simply filling in the 44,000. Okay, and there's 1 mark normally if there's no calculation. Let's now look at water and electricity for the actual factory. So water and electricity balance was 62,000. This excludes the last month's account of 5,200. Right, so again guys, got to take the year-end adjustment into account first. So 62,000, I need to now include 5,200, the water and electricity for the month of March, right? And then going back to the actual floor space, remember 80% is the factory, so we're going to multiply that by 80%, and the water and electricity used by the factory, let's try and do that quickly. So 62,000 plus 5,200, right, times 80%, and that's giving me an amount of 53,760. Okay, so let's fill that in. Right, so water and electricity, an amount of 53,760. Okay, just enough time for us to look at depreciation. So going back to the information, total depreciation calculated on all fixed assets was 80,200. Now, what do they mean by that? On all fixed assets? So everything for the factory, for admin, for the sales department, all depreciation. So remember, once again, we only interested in the 80% because that is for the factory. So let's quickly work that out. So 80,200 times 80%, and that gives us 64,160. So that is obviously my depreciation for the factory. Okay, so depreciation, an amount of 64,160. Right, what's left for you to do? Obviously, you need to total this. Okay, so if you total, the total should be an amount of 456,816, right? No, guys, my brain is not on super mode, right? I've got the answer in front of me, but that's the answer that you should get. So remember, this is the amount I'm now going to take to my production cost statement. Right, so production cost statement, factory overheads is that amount of 456,816. Okay, what's left for you to do? Fill in your prime cost, which is obviously direct material plus direct labor. And if you then add on factory overheads, you should get your total manufacturing cost. I'm just now peeking at the memo quickly, and your total manufacturing cost, okay, I seem to be missing that. Oh no, I do have it, an amount of 1,075,816. Fill in work in progress at the beginning of the year, right? And obviously work in progress at the end of the year. Okay, so work in progress at the beginning of the year. Let's just correct that. Work in progress, beginning of the year. And like I said, work in progress at the end of the year.